Hi! Today I'll be delving into Star Wars through the filters of game design. This video will be unconventional for my channel, but it's something I've been thinking about for a while, and I feel I needed to get it out there. I'm not making a pitch for an ideal Star Wars game, nor am I trying to analyze or critique how Star Wars has been translated into games before. This video is an essay whose focus is to shed light on the systems which Star Wars might have used if it were a game. To do this, I'll be analyzing the various internal aspects of the franchise as well as some of the external ones. Because of the brand's size and influence, I'll refrain from discussing the game itself and focus more on discussing certain systems and mechanics. This is so you can filter through my design to see if it matches up to your definition of Star Wars. I'll occasionally bring up a game, but only as a thought exercise. I'll be doing it in order to contextualize and contrast some elements. Additionally, I will inevitably be using the philosophies behind adaptations and the monomyth, with my lens being constructed by viewing various interviews with George Lucas, Lawrence Kasdan, and Irving Kershner. I am AesirAesthetics, and this is Star Wars as a game. To understand how Star Wars might have worked as a game, we need firstly to have a firm grasp on what Star Wars is. Your definition will undoubtedly vary from mine, but to help you improve upon my design, I'll present mine so that you can see from where my conclusions were drawn. But before I do, I implore you to use the comment section to correct me where I went astray and to pitch in some of your ideas. The more participation we have, the further we lean away from my original tunnel vision. To me, Star Wars is the realization of characters over visuals. It's high-tier fantasy dressed up as low-tier science fiction. It's an allegory to mysticism and spirituality, but clearly exists in a reality closer to our own. It's a world which can encompass characters ranging from the wise Jedi Master Yoda to the swashbuckling, smooth-talking ladies' man Han Solo. It is a world which can offer an escapist fantasy and a world that is governed by the rules established by Joseph Conrad's A Hero of a Thousand Faces. It's a mature take on the good versus evil dilemma, as its ultimate victory is not in killing Darth Vader, but rather realizing his humanity. It is that maturity which separates it from the competition. The characters are more than simple foils for one another. They are more internally realized than their goofy designs might lead a newcomer to believe, but that being said, Star Wars is also very newcomer friendly. It can be enjoyed by children and grown-ups alike. I was introduced to Star Wars when I was 3 years old, and I have yet to face a maturity milestone in my life where I was not able to appreciate it on some level. I cannot remember a time when I did not consider myself a fan, so be aware that the upcoming essay will, in spite of my best efforts, be overly protective of my understanding and appreciation of what Star Wars is. The first aspect of Star Wars which I'm going to discuss is the widest subject in this video, the game. First off, I do not believe you can take a pre-existing formula, slap a license on it and have it capture the magic which the license holds. To adapt is to translate the meaning behind the original presentation from one medium into another. The meaning is thus the most fundamental thing to understand, and since you know what I consider the meaning of Star Wars to be, we can move on to the second most important aspect of adapting. Understanding each medium's strengths. Star Wars originated in film, so understanding the strengths of film is as important to this discussion as understanding the strengths of games. Film is really good at presenting very focused and deliberate moments. They consist purely of visuals and sound. You can argue that there is a social aspect, interpretational and, because of popcorn, a taste sensation to them as well. But my definition will be more strict. Visuals and sound. To capitalize on their connection, Star Wars as a game should ideally be a video game, as video game includes both visuals and sound. This means that 2/3 of the new medium consists purely of the original. Adapting film into video games is easier than the other way around, as the translation is simply to add upon the original medium. A parallel is book to film. The process of filmmaking includes writing a script which is very comparable to writing a book. That means that to adapt a book into a movie is simply to add one step: translate the book into a screenplay. The process of making movies into video games capitalizes on the same strength. The latter medium encompasses all aspects of the former. So the question of making Star Wars into a video game is, at least on paper, a very simple one. How does interactivity relate to Star Wars? The interactivity of games makes them good at capturing empathy. It makes them good at capturing sportsmanship, community, and most valuable and over-discussed of them all, immersion. Interactivity in games rely on systems whose relationship to the player is generally governed by two opposing forces: the win states and the failure states. These guide the player's behavior and their application of available mechanics. They must therefore make the player behave in a manner fitting of the Star Wars universe. It's a bit early to delve into the Force, but for now, let it be sufficient to say that the player's actions determine their Force alignment more than the other way around. The player cannot use the Force by understanding the systems which govern how the Force works. The player's knowledge of the systems must be secondary to their character's understanding of the world. I'm not sure if the final win state should necessarily be to acquire deeper knowledge of the Force, but I am sure that in order to abide by the hero's journey, the win state must be to return to the point of origin with some manner of power. If we follow the hero's journey, which we will as it's the skeletal structure of Star Wars as a whole, then the game starts with the character in their natural environment. They are then forced to interact with a world they never knew existed. This change of setting must shake up the character's understanding of the world, so that when they come back to the story's point of origin, they will no longer be contained within it. They will have grown and changed during their adventure, so I think the best win state is that the character acquires a deeper knowledge of themselves and their place in the world. I believe this to be the optimal win state, as it's a very wide and unspecific goal. What that understanding is doesn't really matter as long as there is some fundamental change in the character. That's the overarching win state, but the character isn't necessarily looking to come home as a wiser man or woman. They're more so looking to come home wise, which makes that their win state. Them returning home is a byproduct of the wisdom which they acquired. Smaller win states might present themselves as win this game of Sabacc and you'll get an extra fuel container for your journey. Make your way to the hangar-on scene and you'll be able to escape the planet on a higher quality vessel. To make each of these meaningful, a certain failure state must be able to arise from each win state. Maybe the high-quality vessel will draw unwanted attention from an unwholesome third party. These examples are fairly unfocused, but that's because I'm not trying to get into the nitty-gritty of the game's design. These are just some ideas. I also want to point out that skill needn't be a governing factor for the game, and I'll explain why in a bit. If a win state tells us what the characters want, then a failure state is an opportunity to tell us who the characters are. Video games have, en masse, given themselves a significant handicap as an art form by abandoning meaningful failure states. Dying is not a meaningful failure state if the character respawns after a brief loading screen. This is true regardless of whether the player will be replaying a 5-minute segment over again or lose 2 hours of progress from a game over screen. It doesn't matter if the characters have a rich backstory when their progress is a result of trial and error and not personal growth. This emphasis on meaningless failure states reduces the artistry behind these games into challenges or puzzles. Those things are not bad, and games which play around with the conceits of these limitations can be very intriguing, but the bottom line is that if we want to play challenge-driven games or puzzles, we'd still be playing Tetris. If we want to play meaningful games, then we need video games to have a deeper discipline of design. Tetris is great and all, but without some very played-out context meddling or equally overplayed postmodernism, it can't tell us anything about the human condition. The systems should be designed to make the player feel immersed in the Star Wars universe, and the Star Wars universe is not a power fantasy or fun. There are moments to which those elements adhere, but that's not the extent to how we want to see this world or its characters presented. In representing these characters as characters are represented in the Star Wars universe, we need to keep in mind a few key phrases, those being morality, adventure, self-serving, downtrodden, and human. If my definition held up to your scrutiny, then these descriptions of the character's characteristics are probably acceptable as well. To present these characteristics, it's better to focus on the character's failures, not their victories. In classical writing, victory is a way to reward repeat failures. This actually leads me into my next subject, which is the player. Since Star Wars is an adventure, I feel it'd be best that the role of the player is to be immersed. I genuinely believe that. More so than being a driving force for narrative or trying to amass fun from the game, the player should be aiming to become engaged in the world. Therefore, it might be beneficial to explore giving the player more than one window into the world. That would mean they'd need to be allowed to inhabit more than one character. If the player is allowed to choose from a selection of classes and races, then their mechanical options should be restricted to those that the class and race they picked have. There's not a leveling system, but rather a passive and subtle attunement system. Most of the character's growth should come from the player's understanding the character and their place in the world. For example, a human would have an easier time dealing with Imperial guards than a Rodian would, but a Rodian would have an easier time dealing with the Hutts than a human would. Character progress is thus represented by their interaction and their alignments with other characters. Though interaction with characters will be the most important piece of aligning with them, the player's presentation, their clothing, race, and class will be taken into consideration as well. That means that each character's sense of self needs to be made into a system, and that system must also encompass what that character thinks of other characters. I'm not talking about massive dialogue trees or text, but rather how extensive each conversation might be. Since everyone in the story might have a different goal, each character the player is allowed to inhabit has their own hero's journey, and if the player decides to revisit an old adventure, then they will be able to do so as another character. Seeing the same events from another perspective lends depth to the story, the characters, and the world. To fit everyone's journey within a single story, we need to capitalize on the monomyth. The monomyth makes each character's goals and adventures specific to them, while maintaining the same structure for each character. It makes each story fairly concrete, but it also makes them malleable enough for the various systems we've constructed to contain it. If you allow classes, then the story must encompass all classes. The same goes for the races and all genders. My thinking is that if we design the systems first, we can use them as a canvas for various small and self-contained stories. That'd make it possible for the game to cover a wider breadth of content and legitimizes a more focused structure, since each adventure needn't be more than an hour long. Star Wars is a rich universe, and it'd be a shame not to explore the vastness it contains. It would enable us to tell more stories about each of the universe's conceits. On that subject, for me, the best moment of any fictional universe is when the conceit of the universe is used to tell us something about the characters. Therefore, I feel it makes sense to have the story be a means of utilizing all the unique elements of the Star Wars universe to provide a deeper look at each character. Since I'm discussing the conceits of the universe, the Force is an all-encompassing power which surrounds and permeates everything. Thus, every system in the game must be designed on top of the system used to represent the Force. The Force must be the base which everything else must be designed on top of. That way, when the player interacts with a system in some manner, they interact with the Force, and vice versa. Alignments in the Force must be governed by what the characters and the players do. The Force, being such a ubiquitous entity, means that we cannot simply label the alignments as the light side of the Force or the dark side of the Force. Rather than giving a definite alignment, the game works best if the player must sense their own affiliation by understanding what their actions up to that point say about them. Using the Jedi mind trick to alter a character's perception is not inherently good or bad. The question must be what the player changed their perception to. Were they using the trick to overcome an obstacle or to circumvent conflict? The context for the action must be the governing force for how the action transforms the player's alignment, and that alignment is made apparent when interacting with the characters who have an alignment on that matter as well. That basically means that, say, a Jedi would confront another Jedi very differently from how he would confront a great Jedi. This is a means of pulling the player into the world, as they must be conscious of the consequences of their actions. They need to understand that in this world, characters respond to you. A controversial argument I'll make about the Force, and in fact the planets, lightsabers, and all conceits of the world's fantasy, is that its application should exclusively be to display the character's location in the story. I do not believe that Star Wars needs the Force as much as it flaunts it, and I'll argue that the best moments of the Force are those that use it to delve into the characters. If you think about Luke's training on Dagobah, you'd remember that the Force was really just a means of showing us the contrast between Luke and Yoda. It was a means of pulling these characters toward each other so that Star Wars could show that it's not the strength of the characters, but rather their convictions that keep us engaged. After all, Luke did fail his training. One could make the argument that since he ultimately lost to Vader, the movie suffers from showing his training, but that'd be missing the point. It's showing us the depth of these characters and the internal struggle which exists within all of us. It's showing us that size and status are not a true means of delivering characters. The Force is at its best when it's used as a means of delving into characters. So the question I'll let you answer is, how does the Force translate to gameplay? Will we include a mana bar or a regenerating pool coupled with some offensive and defensive maneuvers? Or will we have it be a means of delving into the emotional stages of each character? I've seen the former take various forms in games before, but to me, the latter always made more sense. In summary, if Star Wars is an engrossing fantasy to you, one in which characters are at the forefront and take priority over the action and special effects, then maybe this essay is giving you something to think about. If any of these systems made sense Star Wars-wise to you, then I've done my job. Whatever you take from this video, remember that I could not have fully conveyed or captured Star Wars, as Star Wars is what the fandom has made it. It's quite possible that I've been reading too deep into this or have been focusing in other areas than you. What I've gotten out of Star Wars has always changed as I've grown up, so I wouldn't be surprised if these definitions and systems will leave me uninterested in 10 years. Looking back, I might even think these conclusions capture myself at this point more so than they capture Star Wars, but this is the best I can do. I hope you walk away from this video with something. Whether it's insight or better ideas than mine doesn't matter, as long as I haven't been wasting your time. If you enjoyed this video, then I suggest subscribing for more content like this. If you have some ideas on how Star Wars would work as a game, be sure to leave a comment below. Like and share this video if you want more people to see it, and until next time, take care!